Commander Rylan strode through the colossal airlock of the Varen Palace asteroid, the weight of his mission pressing on him like the gravity boots he wore. Even after years in the Galactic Peacekeepers, he had never felt a tension quite like this. The Varens were not only highly advanced, they were proud, disciplined, and known for their unforgiving culture. He had been summoned for one purpose, to guard Queen Alara during the night when the palace was most vulnerable. And yet, something about the mission felt different from the usual assignments. The palace itself was unlike any place Rylan had ever seen. The walls shimmered with a translucent energy that seemed alive, bending light in patterns that made the corridors twist in impossible ways. Gravity fields shifted subtly as he walked, allowing stairs to curve into the ceiling and balconies to float in midair. He had trained for environments like this, but nothing prepared him for the sense of isolation he felt. He was far from Earth, far from any familiar star system, and he was alone in a palace designed to make strangers uncomfortable. "Commander Rylan," a soft, melodic voice greeted him as he entered the central chamber. Queen Alara stepped into view. She was taller than most humans, with skin that seemed to reflect the light of the palace, giving her an almost ethereal glow. Her eyes, a shade between silver and violet, locked onto him with an intensity that made him straighten instinctively. "Welcome to my home." "I trust your journey was comfortable," Rylan inclined his head. "As comfortable as interstellar travel allows, Your Majesty, I am ready to serve." She smiled faintly. It was a smile that seemed to carry secrets, amusement, and something unspoken. "Good. But your service tonight will be unusual. I do not want you stationed outside the chamber or in the halls. I want you to sleep beside me." Rylan froze. His training screamed caution. Guards never, under any circumstances, slept in the same room as royalty. It was considered a breach of protocol, a risk to both the ruler and the empire. Yet the queen's voice did not waver. There was no question in it, only calm authority. I will comply, Your Majesty," he said carefully. Every instinct in his body bristled, but something in her gaze forced obedience. There was trust there, or perhaps a test. Either way, he could not refuse. She guided him through the chamber, a vast room suspended in anti-gravity fields, with a bed that floated above the floor like a platform of light. The furniture was minimal, but every item seemed designed for purpose and elegance. "The night may be long," she said, "and dangerous. That is why I requested your presence. You are to be both shield and witness." As Rylan set up his small sleeping station beside her, he noticed the palace's security measures. Holographic scanners floated like ghosts above every doorway, monitoring the asteroid for intruders. Automated turrets were hidden behind panels in the walls, their presence subtle but deadly. The Queen's security was impressive, but even it could not account for every threat. He had learned that in space, danger often came from the unexpected. Night fell and the palace transformed. The shifting lights dimmed, casting the chambers in a calm blue glow. Rylan maintained vigilance while attempting to find some comfort near the Queen. He was trained to sleep lightly, to wake instantly at the first sign of danger. But as he watched her, the rhythm of her breathing, the slight movement of her hands, and the way her eyes tracked the shifting lights, he began to sense a quiet intelligence and calm confidence that was rare even among humans. Minutes stretched into hours. The silence was broken only by distant hums of the palace machinery and the soft whispers of energy flowing through the walls. Suddenly, a faint vibration ran beneath the floor, subtle but noticeable to someone trained as he was. Rylan stiffened, instinctive adrenaline sharpening his senses. His eyes scanned the room, noting nothing out of the ordinary. Still, his instincts screamed that something was wrong. The Queen's voice broke the silence. "Do not fear what you cannot see, Commander. Fear can cloud judgment faster than any laser or trap." He nodded, keeping his gaze fixed on the shifting corridors beyond the chamber. "Understood, Your Majesty." Hours passed. Then, without warning, alarms rang through the palace. Tiny, insect-like drones had breached the outer walls, slipping past the first layer of defenses. Rylan leaped to his feet, reaching for his pulse weapon, only to see the drones dissolve into harmless holograms before he could strike. He froze, trying to understand the mechanism of deception. "They are testing you," the Queen said calmly, as if she had anticipated this exact moment. "Some threats are not physical. Some are designed to see how you think, how you respond." Rylan's brow furrowed. She spoke in riddles, but he realized her words carried truth. In her presence, instinct mattered more than protocol, courage more than training. The night was not only a mission, it was a test of his judgment, loyalty, and presence of mind. Minutes later, the palace went quiet again, but Rylan could not shake the feeling of eyes watching him from the shadows. The queen lay back on her floating bed, her posture regal and relaxed, as if she knew the danger would never reach them, or perhaps she welcomed it. Rylan remained vigilant, scanning every corridor and doorway. Every shadow could hide a threat. Every silent corner could conceal a weapon or a spy. Hours of tense observation passed. As he began to tire, he noticed the subtle nuances of her movements, how she shifted slightly when energy patterns in the palace changed, how her eyes flicked to certain points without looking directly at them. She was reading the environment just as he was, but with a precision and grace that was beyond human comprehension. "You notice things," she said quietly. "It is a skill most humans do not possess. Most are blinded by fear or distraction." Rylan nodded, unwilling to speak but absorbing every word. He realized that the queen had chosen him not merely as a guard, but as an equal in observation and analysis. The knight's purpose went beyond protection. It was about partnership, trust, and the unspoken understanding between two beings from vastly different worlds. As the night wore on, Rylan's mind wandered to the politics of the Varen Empire. This queen, young yet wise beyond her years, carried the weight of countless lives on her shoulders. The empire was vast, composed of dozens of star systems, each with its own ambitions and rivalries. A single misstep could ignite war or civil unrest. The thought of such responsibility weighed heavily on him. Yet, despite the tension, he found himself learning from her. Not lessons of combat or protocol, but lessons of perception, patience, and intuition. She had a way of seeing through illusions, detecting threats not by sensors or weapons, but by understanding intent. Rylan realized that this was the true reason she had asked him to sleep beside her, to test not his weapons, but his mind and spirit. Then, without warning, a faint hum resonated through the chamber. It was different from the palace's usual energy flow, darker, colder, and somehow more deliberate. Rylan's hand went to his weapon, heart racing, but the queen placed a gentle hand on his arm. "Do not act rashly," she whispered. "Observe first, react second. That is the rule of survival in darkness." He obeyed, watching the corridors with sharp attention. Shadows shifted unnaturally, and tiny flickers of light danced in patterns that were not random. He realized the palace was alive in ways he had not considered. It reacted to threats, adjusted its energy flows, and even communicated in subtle signals. And through it all, the queen remained calm, almost serene, guiding him with her presence alone. Time lost meaning. The stars outside the asteroid glimmered faintly, distant and indifferent to the tension inside. Rylan found his mind teetering between fatigue and hyper-alertness. Every sound, every movement, every flicker of light became a puzzle to decode. And all the while, the queen slept beside him, or perhaps only appeared to sleep. He could sense her awareness, a constant monitoring that seemed to extend even into her rest. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the palace fell silent once more. The drones, the shadows, the hums, all disappeared as though they had never existed. Rylan allowed himself a small exhale, muscles relaxing slightly. The queen stirred, opening her eyes with the calm of someone who had been awake the whole time. "You survived the first test," she said softly, almost a murmur. "And you observed without fear. That is a skill most lack." Rylan looked at her, realizing that the night had been far more than guarding royalty. It had been a lesson in trust, perception, and understanding, a lesson that would shape the battles and decisions to come. As the first faint light of a distant star peeked through the palace windows, Rylan felt the weight of his mission in a new way. He was no longer merely a soldier assigned to watch over a queen. He was a witness to her world, a participant in her challenges, and perhaps, if he could prove himself, a partner in something far greater than either had yet imagined. The night had begun with an unusual command, to sleep beside a queen. It ended with Rylan understanding that protection was not only about weapons or armor, it was about presence, insight, and courage. And as he watched the queen rise, preparing for the coming day, he knew that the real journey was only beginning. The sun of the distant star barely lit the edges of the Varen Palace asteroid when Commander Rylan awoke, muscles stiff from a night of alertness. The queen had risen before him, already moving through her chamber with a calm, precise grace. She seemed unaffected by the long hours, as if the night had been mere rest rather than a tense test of vigilance. "Good morning, Commander," she said, her voice soft but carrying authority. "I hope you slept well enough to remain attentive." Rylan bowed slightly, careful not to show fatigue. "I am ready for the day, Your Majesty. The palace is secure." She regarded him thoughtfully, her violet eyes scanning his face. "Security is never absolute. One can only prepare, observe, anticipate." Rylan understood immediately. Her words were not mere lessons, they were warnings. Even in the calm light of morning, she reminded him that danger could appear at any moment. The night had been the first test, but the day, he knew, would be the true challenge. Breakfast was a quiet affair. Rylan noticed how the Queen ate sparingly, her movements deliberate. She spoke little, but every glance seemed to carry a message. He could sense the intelligence behind her actions, a mind always planning, always calculating. And yet there was also warmth in her presence, subtle but undeniable. It was the kind of trust that demanded respect, and Rylan felt both privileged and burdened by it. After the meal, the Queen led him through the palace corridors. They were unlike any he had seen before, full of twisting passages, floating platforms, and energy fields that responded to the presence of living beings. The halls themselves seemed alive, humming with power and intelligence. "Tonight you will not sleep by my side," she said casually as they walked. "But you will remain vigilant. The palace is more than stone and metal. It reacts, adapts, and learns. You must do the same." Rylan nodded. He had already begun to notice the subtle changes in the energy patterns from the night before. Now, moving through the palace in daylight, he could see more clearly how the environment shifted in response to their presence. Sensors hidden in the walls flickered with subtle light, doors opened and closed without touch, and shadows moved in patterns that seemed almost conscious. "Do you trust this place?" the Queen asked suddenly, her gaze sharp. Rylan considered the question carefully. "I trust that it will protect you, Your Majesty, as it was designed to do, but I do not trust that it will remain free of danger. Nothing is perfect, even here." She smiled faintly. "Good. That is the awareness I require. Perfection is an illusion. Vigilance is reality." As they moved deeper into the palace, a sudden vibration rippled through the floor. It was faint but distinct. Rylan's hand went instinctively to his weapon. "It begins again," the Queen murmured. From the shadows, small drones emerged, identical to the ones from the previous night. But these were different. They carried faint pulses of energy that disrupted sensors and communication signals. Rylan realized instantly that this was no test. Someone or something was probing the palace's defenses, learning patterns, looking for weaknesses. "Stay calm," the Queen instructed, her voice even. "They are not here to kill yet. Observe, learn." Rylan's mind raced. The drones moved with deliberate coordination, scanning hallways, analyzing energy flows, and retreating when confronted. He noticed that the Queen did not reach for a weapon. She watched, her eyes tracking patterns invisible to him. There was intelligence there, not just observation, and Rylan realized she had predicted this intrusion before it even occurred. The next hour became a tense dance. Rylan followed her instructions, moving through corridors, blocking access points, and redirecting the drones without direct confrontation. He marveled at her control over the situation. Her calm presence guided him, even when the palace itself seemed uncertain. It was as if she could see possibilities he could not, and he began to understand the depth of her experience and instinct. Finally, the drones retreated into the walls, vanishing as if they had never existed. Rylan allowed himself a small exhale, but the Queen's gaze remained on him. "Do you understand now?" she asked. "Partially, Your Majesty," he replied, "but I am learning quickly. These are not ordinary intruders." "Correct," she said. "They are scouts, observers. The ones who will follow are far more dangerous. We are only seeing the beginning." Rylan felt a chill run down his spine. The Queen's calmness belied the gravity of her words. He had protected leaders before, faced pirates and rebels, but the calculated patience of an unseen enemy was different. It required intellect, not just courage. They continued through the palace, eventually reaching a chamber that seemed more like a control hub than a room. Panels of light floated in the air, displaying star systems, energy flows, and what looked like schematics of the palace itself. "This is the heart of our monitoring," the Queen explained. From here, I can anticipate threats and adjust defenses, but even I cannot do it alone. That is why I have you, not to act blindly, but to see what I cannot, to anticipate what sensors cannot detect." Rylan nodded. The responsibility weighed heavily on him. He was no longer simply a soldier assigned to watch over a queen. He was a participant in a living system, an essential part of the palace's defenses, and potentially the first line against an invisible enemy. As the day wore on, Rylan observed the palace and its energy systems, learning how to move without triggering alarms, how to interpret the faint signals that indicated movement, and how to read the patterns in the energy flow. He realized that every action he took could have consequences, not just for himself, but for the queen and the entire empire. During a break, the queen approached him, her expression unreadable. "You are beginning to understand," she said softly, "but understanding is not enough. You must anticipate, act before events force you to react. That is the difference between survival and failure." Rylan considered her words carefully. He had faced countless threats before, but the subtlety of this challenge was new. Survival was no longer about combat alone. It was about foresight, awareness, and partnership. Even as he absorbed her lesson, the palace shuddered slightly. Alarms sounded faintly, not in panic, but in warning. Something, or someone, was moving in the lower levels. Rylan and the queen exchanged a glance. No words were needed. They moved quickly, silently, through corridors that bent and twisted in impossible ways. The lower levels were darker, less maintained, and far more unpredictable. Gravity fields shifted without warning, and shadows clung unnaturally to walls and ceilings. Rylan's training guided him, but he relied heavily on the queen's instincts. She moved with confidence, guiding him through the maze-like halls, and he began to sense a rhythm, a silent communication that required no words. Then they saw it. A figure, cloaked and moving almost invisibly, slipped through a corridor ahead. The queen gestured subtly, and Rylan moved to intercept, careful to remain silent and unseen. The figure paused, scanning the area, unaware of the two watching from the shadows. "They are scouts," the queen whispered. "They gather information, test defenses. We will not engage them yet. Let them make a mistake." Rylan's heart raced. Every second counted. He watched the scout make a minor misstep, triggering a hidden sensor. The queen's control system immediately identified the intruder, sending a small pulse of energy that immobilized it without harm. The scout froze, stunned, and the queen signaled for Rylan to approach. He moved carefully, ensuring the intruder could not escape. It was small, humanoid in shape, but with features unlike any species he had seen: elongated limbs, pale luminescent skin, and eyes that seemed too large for their face. It struggled faintly, but the queen's energy field held it firmly in place. "Observe," she instructed. "Do not act rashly. We learn more from restraint than from aggression." Rylan watched closely. The scout's movements were calculated, precise. It was intelligent, trained, and dangerous, and yet it had underestimated the queen's foresight. After a tense moment, the queen released the scout, which scurried into the shadows, clearly shaken but unharmed. "They will report back," she said, "and we will know when the next attempt comes. The night is coming, Commander, and with it the real challenge." Rylan's mind raced. The scout had confirmed what he had feared. The palace was under observation, and enemies were already planning their moves. He realized that every moment of vigilance mattered, every decision could shift the outcome of what was to come. As the day faded into night, the queen returned to her chamber, and Rylan prepared for the long hours ahead. He set up near her once again, ready to respond to any threat, and aware that the night would bring more than tests, it would bring confrontation. The queen lay down, her presence calm and commanding. Rylan watched, alert, noting every subtle movement, every faint signal of energy around the chamber. The palace was alive, the enemies were out there, and he understood, finally, the true weight of his assignment. This was not only protection. It was survival, strategy, and trust, all intertwined in a web that could determine the fate of an entire empire. And as the first intruders of the night began their silent approach, Rylan felt the full gravity of the queen's decision. She had chosen him not just for strength, but for insight, courage, and loyalty. The night would be long, the stakes could not be higher, and the lessons of trust and awareness were only beginning to unfold. The night had grown deeper than Rylan had ever experienced. Outside the palace windows, the asteroid floated silently among stars that shone cold and distant. Inside, however, tension vibrated in every corridor, every shadow, every shimmer of energy. Rylan remained near Queen Alara, alert and silent, sensing that the calm from the earlier intrusion was only temporary. "You are learning quickly," the Queen said softly, almost a whisper, though her voice carried authority even in the darkness. "Most humans would be exhausted by now, but you adapt. That is why I chose you." Rylan nodded, though he said nothing. Words seemed unnecessary between them. Their understanding had become something unspoken, a rhythm formed by shared vigilance. He observed the faint energy pulses in the chamber, noting changes he had learned to recognize as signs of movement, either from the palace's systems or from intruders. Suddenly, a subtle vibration ran through the floor, a pulse that was more deliberate than the earlier ones. Rylan's hand instinctively went to his pulse weapon and he crouched, scanning the shadows. The Queen did not move, her eyes calm, but he could sense her awareness, tracking the same patterns he observed. "They are coming," she said quietly. "Not scouts this time. More organized, more dangerous. We must be ready." Rylan swallowed, aware that this was the first real confrontation. The palace's defenses would react, but they could not prevent every intrusion. He had learned that in space, even the most advanced technology could be outwitted by clever minds. And someone was planning carefully, exploiting weaknesses the palace might not even know existed. The intruders appeared suddenly, moving through a hidden corridor near the palace's core. Rylan could not see them clearly at first. They were cloaked, blending with the shadows, but their presence triggered subtle changes in the energy patterns. The Queen signaled him to follow silently, guiding him through floating platforms and shifting gravity fields. "Stay close," she whispered. "Do not reveal yourself unless necessary. Watch, learn, and strike only when the moment is right." Rylan obeyed, his heart pounding. He had faced enemies before, but nothing like this. These were not mere pirates or rebels. They were precise, disciplined, and equipped with technology designed to bypass detection. They were scouts, superiors, capable of real danger. The palace corridors twisted unnaturally as they moved, and Rylan struggled to keep pace with the Queen's calm, measured movements. She seemed to anticipate every shift, every subtle gravitational change, guiding him without words. It was as if she could see the future, or at least a few seconds ahead, enough to stay one step ahead of danger. They reached a chamber deep within the palace, one Rylan had never seen before. Panels of floating light displayed star systems, energy flows, and what looked like intricate maps of the palace itself. The Queen paused, turning to him. "This is the core observation hub," she explained softly. "From here I can control defenses, track energy fluctuations, and anticipate threats. But even I cannot predict everything. That is why you are here, to act where instinct is required." Before Rylan could respond, the intruders arrived, breaching the lower-level corridor that connected to the observation hub. They were humanoid, but taller and more alien than the scout from the previous night. Their skin shimmered faintly in low light, and their eyes glowed with a soft, unnatural hue. They carried devices that pulsed with strange energy, designed to disable defenses. The Queen raised her hand subtly, and a protective barrier formed around them. Rylan watched as the intruders paused, scanning for weaknesses. They were calculating, cautious, but also confident that the palace could not stop them. Rylan understood immediately. The intruders were part of a rogue faction operating outside the Veyran Empire. Their goal was not to kill indiscriminately, but to gather intelligence, test defenses, and weaken the palace before a larger strike. "They are more dangerous than scouts," the Queen whispered. "We cannot underestimate them. We must act carefully with precision." Rylan nodded. He had learned restraint over the past night and day, but now restraint alone would not suffice. Action was necessary, but timing and observation were key. The intruders moved closer to the core systems, manipulating energy panels and attempting to bypass the palace's automated defenses. Rylan followed the Queen's lead, watching their every move, learning their patterns. He noticed how they hesitated when the Queen's energy field subtly shifted, responding to their presence. She had trained the palace itself to detect intent, not just movement, a concept beyond conventional security. "They underestimate you," she said quietly. "They see a guard, not a mind. That will be their mistake." Rylan waited, focusing on the subtle cues, a faint pulse in the floor, a shimmer in the walls, the way the intruders shifted their weight. He calculated the timing, anticipating when to intervene. Suddenly, one intruder reached for a panel controlling energy flow. Rylan acted instinctively, stepping into view and firing a pulse weapon that emitted a non-lethal shock. The intruder staggered but remained standing. The Queen did not intervene. She had allowed him to act, testing his judgment. "You judged correctly," she said softly, though her eyes never left the intruders. "You acted decisively but not recklessly. That is critical." The remaining intruders hesitated, now aware that the palace itself was a trap. They had anticipated minimal resistance, and their calculations had not accounted for the Queen and her guard acting in perfect coordination. Rylan realized that their goal was to reach the core control system. If they succeeded, they could disable defenses, open corridors, and allow the rogue faction to strike the Empire. Every second mattered. The Queen moved with grace, manipulating energy fields with gestures so subtle they were almost invisible. Rylan followed, using his weapons only when necessary, disabling intruders, devices without causing harm. Together, they forced the attackers back toward the corridor they had entered. One of the intruders attempted a desperate maneuver, leaping toward the observation hub's central console. Rylan anticipated it, firing a calculated shot that disrupted the device the intruder carried. Sparks flew and the intruder fell, momentarily stunned. The Queen signaled him forward, and Rylan moved quickly, ensuring the intruders could not regroup. The remaining enemies retreated, confused and outmaneuvered by the combination of human instinct and Varen precision. When the corridor was clear, Rylan allowed himself a small breath. The Queen, however, remained vigilant, scanning every shadow, every energy pattern, ensuring no further threats were present. "You did well," she said finally, her voice calm but with a hint of admiration. "Few humans could act with such clarity under pressure. You have proven your worth, not only as a guard but as a partner in defense." Rylan felt a surge of pride, tempered by exhaustion. He had faced countless missions before, but nothing like this. The combination of alien technology, unpredictable threats, and the Queen's unparalleled intellect had pushed him to his limits. Yet he had survived, and more importantly, he had acted with insight and restraint. The Queen moved closer, her expression softening. "You must understand, Commander, that these are not ordinary intruders. The rogue faction you faced is only a fraction of the threat. Their reach extends across systems, and their ambition is dangerous. They will return, stronger and more cunning." Rylan nodded. "Then we will be ready. We cannot allow them to succeed." Her eyes met his, intense and unwavering. "That is why I chose you, not for strength alone, but for judgment, intuition, and courage. You see what others cannot. You act where others hesitate. That is rare, even among humans." As the night stretched on, Rylan and the Queen returned to the observation hub, monitoring energy flows and analyzing patterns. Every movement of the palace, every subtle fluctuation could indicate danger. He began to see the palace not just as a building, but as a living system, reacting to allies and enemies alike. Hours passed in tense silence. The Queen taught him how to anticipate the rogue faction's next moves, how to interpret subtle signals in the environment, and how to act decisively while remaining unseen. Rylan absorbed every lesson, aware that the coming hours could determine the safety of the entire Varen Empire. Eventually, the Queen moved to a panel displaying an outer star system. She traced lines with her fingers, highlighting a cluster of ships far from the asteroid. "This is where their main force gathers," she explained. "They are preparing to strike at multiple points. We have only one chance to intercept their plans before they escalate the attack." Rylan studied the map, calculating distances, speeds, and possible approaches. "We will need to move quickly and carefully," he said. "A direct confrontation could be disastrous." "Agreed," she replied. "That is why we act with strategy. Strength alone will not prevail. Intelligence, anticipation, and timing will." The Queen paused, her gaze lingering on Rylan. "You have done more than survive the night. You have proven that humans can be more than soldiers. They can be partners, thinkers, and strategists. That is why I trust you." Rylan felt the weight of her words. He had never been trusted in this way before, not by anyone. The responsibility was immense, but it also brought clarity. He understood that his role had evolved. He was no longer merely a guard. He was a key figure in the defense of an empire, a partner to a queen whose vision extended beyond any single world. The night continued, quiet but charged with anticipation. Every shadow, every flicker of energy, was a reminder that the rogue faction would return. And when they did, Rylan and the Queen would need to act with perfect coordination, blending human instinct with alien precision. As dawn approached, the Queen finally allowed herself a moment of rest, though her eyes remained alert. Rylan settled near her once again, scanning the chamber and corridors, aware that the calm was temporary. He reflected on the lessons of the night. Trust, observation, anticipation, and courage were as important as any weapon. He realized that the bond between them had grown stronger, forged in the crucible of danger and shared understanding. The rogue faction had tested them, but they had responded, and in doing so, Rylan had proven not only his loyalty but his value as a partner in the Empire's defense. And as the first rays of the distant star began to touch the palace, Rylan knew that the coming challenges would be greater, the enemies more cunning, and the stakes higher than ever before. But for the first time, he felt a quiet certainty. With Queen Alara by his side, he was not merely guarding her. He was part of something far larger, something that could shape the future of the galaxy itself. The night had revealed the enemy, the palace had tested their skills, and the bond between human and queen had strengthened. The rogue faction would not wait long to strike again, and when they did, Rylan would be ready, not as a soldier alone, but as a partner in the defense of an empire. The palace was quiet, but the calm felt fragile. Commander Rylan stood beside Queen Alara in the observation hub, both of them watching the data streams that showed the rogue faction's movements across nearby star systems. Every flicker of energy, every ship trajectory, told a story of preparation, ambition, and danger. They had been anticipating this moment, the final confrontation, but the weight of responsibility was heavier than ever. "They will strike soon," the Queen said, her voice steady yet carrying an edge of urgency. "Not with scouts or small teams, this is their main force. They aim to destabilize the Empire and take control of critical systems. One failure could cost countless lives." Rylan tightened his grip on his pulse weapon. "We won't let that happen, Your Majesty. We've prepared for this." She nodded, her violet eyes reflecting the star systems on the floating panels. "Preparation alone is not enough. We must be decisive, coordinated, and willing to act when the moment demands it." The palace hummed around them, a living network of sensors, energy fields, and shifting corridors. Rylan had spent the past 2 nights learning its rhythms, observing its subtle cues, and moving with precision alongside the Queen. Tonight, all of that training would be put to the ultimate test. The first attack came without warning. Rogue faction ships entered the asteroid's orbit, their dark hulls blending against the black of space. Missiles and energy pulses streaked toward the palace defenses, triggering automated shields that flared with brilliant light. Rylan and the Queen stood at the observation hub, watching the display as the palace's energy systems responded instantly. "They are testing our reaction," the Queen said, her fingers tracing lines in the air to redirect energy flows. "They expect us to respond, to reveal weaknesses. We must do the opposite. Let them see only precision." Rylan felt his heart race. The corridors beneath them were alive with energy, responding to the attacks in real time. Automated turrets slid from hidden panels, lasers slicing through the vacuum toward enemy ships. The rogue faction's first wave was impressive, organized, calculated, relentless, but the palace and the Queen were faster. "Deploy defensive drones," the Queen instructed, "but keep them within visible range. Make them think the attack is stronger than it is." Rylan complied, releasing small aerial drones that swarmed the intruders' ships, disrupting targeting systems and forcing them to spread out. Every action was calculated, designed to delay and confuse rather than destroy outright. He watched the Queen's hands move over the controls, her energy fields bending in ways that deflected missiles and pulses, guiding the palace's defenses with surgical precision. Hours passed, and the battle intensified. The rogue faction adapted, their ships moving with greater coordination, their weapons aimed at the palace's most critical systems. Rylan stayed close to the Queen, following her instructions, anticipating her moves, and acting instinctively when she signaled. At one point, a breach occurred in one of the lower corridors. Cloaked agents appeared, bypassing outer defenses with advanced technology that disrupted sensors and communications. Rylan and the Queen moved immediately, descending through shifting gravity fields to intercept. The corridors twisted unnaturally, but they navigated them with practiced precision, each movement synchronized, silent, efficient. The intruders tried to separate them, but Rylan anticipated their tactics. He fired precise pulses that disabled their devices without causing lethal harm, while the Queen manipulated energy fields to guide them into containment zones. The agents struggled, realizing too late that they had underestimated the combination of human instinct and Varen technology. "You move with skill," the Queen whispered, almost a compliment amid the chaos. "Not as a guard, but as a partner. That is rare." Rylan's focus never wavered. "We'll stop them, Your Majesty, we have to." The rogue faction regrouped and attempted a final maneuver. Their main ship, a massive vessel cloaked in dark energy, aimed directly at the asteroid, intending to breach the palace core. Rylan and the Queen watched as the massive silhouette emerged from the shadows of space, its weapon systems primed to strike. "They believe brute force will work," the Queen said calmly, "but they do not understand the palace or us." Rylan nodded. Together, they coordinated the palace's defenses for the ultimate counterattack. Energy fields extended outward, forming barriers that could absorb and redirect the rogue ship's attacks. Drones and automated turrets moved in perfect synchrony, anticipating every movement of the enemy vessel. "You will act," the Queen said, turning to him. "This is your moment, Commander. Trust your instincts. Act decisively. Do not hesitate." Rylan felt a surge of adrenaline. He had prepared for this, trained for this, and now the time had come. Following the Queen's guidance, he directed a precise energy pulse toward the rogue vessel's shields, creating a momentary gap. At the same time, the Queen manipulated the palace's energy to amplify the effect, pushing the ship off balance. The rogue faction's vessel faltered, its trajectory shifting, its weapons misfiring. Rylan and the Queen did not relent. Coordinating their actions, they forced the ship into a controlled retreat, preventing catastrophic damage to the asteroid and the palace. The rogue fleet, witnessing their flagship disabled, began to withdraw. Their agents on the asteroid were captured or contained, and the palace's defenses remained intact. Rylan allowed himself a small breath of relief, but he did not relax completely. He knew the rogue faction's ambition would not be easily quelled. The Queen turned to him, her expression calm but tinged with exhaustion. "You have done more than survive the night. You have acted with clarity, courage, and insight. You have proven that humans can be more than soldiers. They can be partners, strategists, and guardians of the Empire." Rylan felt a sense of pride, tempered by humility. "I could not have done it without you, Your Majesty. Your guidance, your insight, it made all the difference." She smiled faintly. "And yet it was your action that tipped the balance. Intelligence alone is not enough. Strength, courage, and judgment are what make victory possible. You have shown them all tonight." The palace hummed softly around them, a living network of energy and intelligence. Rylan realized how extraordinary it was to fight not just alongside a queen, but with one who could see patterns, anticipate moves, and guide him in real time. Their partnership had saved the palace, and perhaps the Empire. In the quiet aftermath, Rylan and the Queen walked through the corridors, inspecting the systems, ensuring no remaining threats lingered. The palace was secure, but the knowledge that enemies could return lingered in their minds. They could celebrate victory, but vigilance would always be required. "You have changed, Commander," the Queen said softly as they reached the observation hub. "You are no longer merely a guard. You are a participant in the Empire's defense, a witness to its challenges, and a partner in its survival." Rylan nodded. He understood now that his role had evolved beyond simple protection. He was a strategist, an observer, and a guardian in the truest sense. His bond with the Queen, forged through danger and trust, had become something far more significant than either had anticipated. The stars outside the asteroid shone brightly as dawn approached, casting long streaks of light across the palace. Rylan and the Queen stood together, watching the quiet cosmos, aware that the galaxy beyond was vast, dangerous, and full of uncertainty. Yet in that moment they felt a measure of certainty in their partnership. "You will stay," the Queen said, her voice calm, carrying authority but also respect. "Not just as a guardian, but as a partner in all that is to come." The Empire requires more than loyalty. It requires courage, insight, and the ability to act when others hesitate. You have all of these qualities. Rylan bowed, humbled by the Queen's trust. "I will serve your majesty, always." The queen regarded him thoughtfully, her gaze intense yet not unkind. "Then let us prepare. The rogue faction may regroup, and the challenges ahead will demand everything we have. But for now, you have earned rest. You have proven your value beyond measure." Rylan allowed himself a small, rare smile. He had survived the tests, faced the rogue faction, and acted with skill, courage, and judgment. And more importantly, he had forged a bond with a queen whose wisdom and trust would guide him in the battles to come. As he settled near her in the observation hub, watching the palace settle into calm once more, he reflected on the journey. From the moment she had asked him to sleep beside her, he had been tested in ways he had never imagined. Trust, courage, insight, restraint, these had been the true measures of his worth, and he had passed. The rogue faction had been defeated, the palace secured, and the queen's safety ensured. Yet the experience had shown him that vigilance, partnership, and understanding were far more powerful than weapons alone. He had learned that true protection required more than strength. It required insight, patience, and unwavering loyalty. The queen, aware of his thoughts, placed a hand lightly on his shoulder. "You are ready for all that is to come," she said softly. "The galaxy will test you, Commander, but you have proven yourself capable. Together, we will face whatever challenges await." Rylan looked at her, seeing not just the ruler of an empire, but a mentor, a strategist, and a partner in the truest sense. He understood now that his life had changed forever. He was no longer merely a guardian at the palace. He was part of a bond that could shape the fate of the Varen Empire and perhaps the galaxy itself. As the first rays of the distant sun stretched across the floating asteroid, Rylan and Queen Alara stood side by side, watching the cosmos, aware of the dangers that lay ahead but confident in their partnership. The rogue faction had been defeated, but their ambitions remained a threat. And yet, with courage, insight, and mutual trust, Rylan knew that they would face whatever came with strength and unity. The night that began with a simple command, to sleep beside the queen, had transformed into a trial of strategy, courage, and trust. And now, at the end of the battle, Rylan understood the true power of partnership. Not weapons, not armor, but loyalty, insight, and the courage to act when the moment demanded it. He glanced at the queen, who returned his gaze with calm assurance. Together, they had faced darkness, outwitted enemies, and forged a bond that would endure. And together, they would face the challenges yet to come, guardians not just of a palace, but of an empire and a future that stretched among the stars.